Yes, we're good to go.
Okay.
Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Horn of Africa TV Conversations. With me, as always, my good friend and comrade, Professor Mohamed Hassan. How are you today, Mohamed?
I'm okay. How are you, Comrade Elias?
I'm good. I'm sorry I missed our discussion last week, but a good friend, Mohamed Badawi, covered for me in Amharic, so that was good. How is it being received? I see that a lot of people are sharing it in the social media.
Indeed. It was okay. It is a good discussion we had.
Yeah, we have to cover all languages. So sometimes
countries and languages.
You do in Amharic is also good too.
Yeah.
And you had done also the previous week with Ustaz Hamdan and the Somali parliamentarian, good friend Dr. Zakaria.
Indeed.
On the Somali situation in Arabic.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
I wish one of these days we can do also an English version with Dr. Zakaria. What do you think?
That would be very good.
Yeah, I know Dr. Zakaria from way back in Asmara, the good old days, 2007. You remember he used to come to our peace building center for the Horn of Africa. Good man.
True. The good man. Is not bad to do with him a program in English that's happening in Somalia to give us the concrete information there.
Exactly.
Yes.
Today is March 8th, so we would like to begin our program by wishing all our women friends, comrades in struggle, and sisters and mothers and daughters a very happy March 8th, International Women's Day. In all corners of the Horn of Africa, in particular in Eritrea, the violent, heroic women, their struggle is exemplary. Women made up over 30% of the fighting force of the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. So they paid a heavy price in the national liberation struggle, and they're still continuing to struggle in the vanguard in the nation building process. So we salute them all. And I would be remiss if I don't give you the chance to say Happy March 8th.
For me, it's the same for all women in the world, and specific for the women in the Horn of Africa, in Eritrea, particularly the women in Eritrea. They have been in the vanguard, and they have contributed a lot in the national independence. As you said, they have also suffered a lot. For all the women in the world, we wish them happy life and more struggle to bring justice and equality for everybody in the world. And I wish them and I salute them. This a very important day had been initiated by the working class by itself, which wants to forge the relationship of the working woman and a working man, and also raising the consciousness of both genders, so that it is equality is a paramount principle of the revolution, which had happened in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and then after that in most of the world. So I wish them all the best. And I wish them a new year of struggle with such a difficult situation we are now. And I salute them.
Indeed, women's struggle is the corner stone of the social justice struggle, very important part. So the struggle continues, saluta continua. A lot of advances have been made, victories achieved, but it is not complete. We have to stand shoulder to shoulder with our women sisters, comrades, and friends in their struggle for equality and emancipation. Having said that, our focus of discussion for this week in this episode of Horn of Africa Conversations will be on what is transpiring on the ground in Ethiopia in particular, in the northernmost region, Tigray, and the interventionist forces from the West demanding access, demanding this and that in the UN Security Council. The human rights situation is being hyped up. The likes of Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch now are charging genocide in Tigray. All, of course, way exaggerated, and this situation is kind of confusing to the outside observer. Those outside our region who just hear what is being said in the Western mainstream media. We would like to clarify this. So by way of setting the context, Mohamed, if you can, explain what happened in the past 2 years and a half post-transition after the reform government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali came to power in Ethiopia. The hegemonic, the former ruling party, the TPLF, fled to its northernmost base, Tigray. So in the past 2 years and a half, what was it doing? And then what happened on November 3, that fateful date, November 3, November 4? Very briefly, just to set up the context, the background.
Thank you very much, Comrade Elias. When I follow the situation after the election of Trump, and Trump, to a certain extent, with his new concept of America First, and his foreign policy to disengage from the military intervention everywhere, it have shocked element of neoliberalist interventionist element in Europe and United States. And it subsided into the back. There was no press campaign. What does it mean of Trump's view on that? They just kept quiet, and they were very sad at this interventionist element. For the first time, you could see with his arrival to the White House 2 months later that the State Department behaved differently from the previous State Department actors. The first thing what it happened is that the United States was willing to resume face-to-face discussion with Eritrea. In fact, for the first time, they have invited Eritrean authorities to come to Washington. They have discussed with them several times. And at that moment, the acting department head, Ambassador Yamamoto, which is later on appointed as an ambassador in Somalia, the view was, I think the State Department understood that it is the era of TPLF is over. And the old type of diplomacy, isolating Eritrea, doesn't work. And in fact, they discussed with the Eritrean authorities, and he himself visited Ethiopia, Eritrea, and so on. And finally, he became an ambassador to Somalia. Of course, since 2017 also, there was a change in Somalia, that President Farmajo was elected, and Somalia is gradually reconstituting herself. but men never expected and didn't analyze properly what is happening in Ethiopia. Of course, in Ethiopia, the situation is getting out of hand of the regime. Since 2014, there was a gradually popular revolt in Oromia, then finally in Amara region and other places. This is one factor. Earlier than that, it is when the Obama administration is in control in Washington, there was a lot of revolts in Gambela, where a massacre happened against the Gambela people, the land grabbing which was given to the Indian businessmen and chasing away, and the genocide committed. There was a lot of report about it. Secondly is, of course, the genocide committed in the different Somali parts. It was continuing. The region was totally closed from the international community, even for Ethiopians, that there is no NGOs, there is nobody, and a huge human rights violation happened there under the TPLF and the TPLF generals. The magnitude of the human violation in the Somali region is unimaginable. But there was no cry too much. There was no praise. There was no Amnesty International at that moment was speaking about this, or Human Rights Watch, whatever it is. There and there, small articles they used to produce because of the vision in United States and Europe that it is backing TPLF until the end was their program. TPLF was part of and the most important element of destabilizing the region. It waged war against Eritrea. It created a lot of difficulties for Eritrean people and Eritrean government, waging internal war everywhere, and being an agent of inside the region to destabilize and to make sure that the region cannot work together and start a new chapter. For that, most of this organization and the so-called intelligentsia, opinion writers, and so on, they were in tandem with TPLF. But they didn't expect that the Ethiopian people's situation is getting worse, and the people have decided not to live as before, and the regime was not able to maintain its power as before. Finally, with all the popular uprising and so on, that the regime was toppled, and of course within the EPRDF, the ruling party also, a new generation came, and finally is Dr. Abiy was elected. Once Dr. Abiy was elected and came as a prime minister in April, almost now 3 years is going to be next month. And
yeah, he came to power in late March, early April of 2018, right?
Yes, indeed. So immediately you could see after a while, Dr. Abiy was nominated as a candidate of Nobel Prize, and finally he became a Nobel Prize winner. This has surprised a lot of people in the sense that they didn't expect. Their vision and their hope was that TPLF is a very strong organization. It can wage several wars at the same time. It is very difficult for TPLF to relinquish the power, and it can stay. But once they were defeated in Addis, they moved to the region for almost 2 years and a half until November 4. The TPLF had three major strategies when they withdrew. They knew that they are a minority and they cannot stay in the center. Therefore, they have to withdraw. And they withdrew to their center in Tigray, and they start mobilizing in Tigray, militias, mobilizing the people of Tigray, building a militia, and so on. And then they celebrated their 45th birthday, and finally they organized their own election outside of the National Election Board. They have said that they will not recognize the prime minister because his time of being prime minister is over. He is illegal. Therefore, is any law which would comes from Addis or it is unacceptable. In fact,
in other words, a very belligerent attitude towards the center, towards Dr. Abiy's government.
Indeed. In fact, Tigray became a de facto independent state, you could say. We will not accept the same. They organize their own election. They organize and they say that they made their own election. They are legitimate. The federal government is illegitimate. Dr. Abiy is illegitimate, and so on. At the same time, organizing a strategy of destabilization inside Ethiopia in the name of so-called the Federalist Association, which they created themselves, sending weapons to different areas, inciting, because the way they reason is that within Ethiopia there is about 10 million members of EPRDF, they believe. And this is not my speech. This is the same, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Suyum Masman. He said it in Tigray TV that there is the member of EPRDF, it is about 10 million, and this they will rise up like one man, one woman. But in reality, there was no 10 million or anything. It is a fantasy of him. His analysis on the ground is very, very poor. Therefore, destabilization continued. And finally, the one side destabilizing and creating inter-ethnic conflict, inviting people there, making conferences, waging a propaganda war, and so on and so on. The understanding the international community and other forces was that TPLF is a very strong organization, formidably, militarily well organized, therefore nobody can challenge the TPLF. But in reality, TPLF was a balloon which have no any mass basis itself within Tigray. Then finally, by panicking, I suppose, and situation was not in favor of them, 4th of November, they attacked the National Army, the Federal Army, which had been stationed for 22 years there, defending them and defending the border.
The National Army, during the past 22 years, had it in any way behaved in aggressive manner towards the Tigrayan population? What was the relationship between the National Army, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, and the people of Tigray in the past almost two and a half decades, right? Since 1998, the so-called border war with Eritrea.
Of course, the National Army, it is very difficult to say the National Army. The TPLF, who is organized the army in such a way that it is TPLF and Tigrayans, they will be at the top of the army. And they dominate the army. According to the Prime Minister Abiy, after the war was over, when he made his long speech in the parliament, he says that almost the fighting force, those who are between the soldier until a major, 50% of them, they were Tigrayans. And for those who are colonels and lieutenant colonels, they were about 60% of them, they were Tigrayans. And in general's position, almost 80% was dominated by Tigrayans.
And for those who are not from the region, what is the percentage of the population of Tigray from the whole 110 million people of Ethiopia?
According to the census, it is about 6 million. I mean, about 6% of the total population of Ethiopia. This is the census.
A very small minority then.
A small minority, but absolutely dominating the army and the bureaucracy. And of course, one of the most important pillars for them also is the security. The security is the most important organ, which also they allocate a huge amount of budget for the security. 20% of the above security, they were Tigrayans, particularly those who are controlling from the above. The army is the same. And when we come to this army, which was stationed in Tigray, they are about 31,000, and one-third of them are Tigrayan speakers. The others is from other Ethiopia. The purpose for them is to create a situation after 1998 war they waged against Eritrea, to create a situation what they call no war, no peace situation. Once they withdrew to Tigray and so on, the first thing what they did is they say we will mobilize the population. We want people-to-people relation with Eritrea and so on. When Eritrea had temporarily opened the border, a lot of Tigrayan came to Eritrea. They were also selling their goods and buying goods. I have visited their markets and I have seen them, some of them visiting also as a tourist to different parts of Eritrea. Of course, Eritrea, once is the agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Dr. Abiy visited Eritrea and they have signed the agreement that Eritrea have relinquished any Ethiopian who can come to Eritrea. It can come through identity card and passport. You don't need a visa. You can travel everywhere within Eritrea. In fact, they made a gesture for Ethiopians that we will not put condition on you. Wherever you go, you can go and visit. And a lot of Ethiopians visited Ethiopia and they have Eritrea and they have seen. The vice versa also is happened. This brought, of course, a cordial relationship among the peoples on one side, while TPLF is mobilizing his propaganda and so on, organizing the Tigrayan peasantry and others, saying we want people-to-people relation and so on, because they don't want that Ethiopia and Eritrea to have a peaceful relationship. They consider that the border issue belongs to Tigray, not to Ethiopia, that Ethiopia have no right to negotiate with Eritrea. And the Eritreans, the vision is that Tigray is part of Ethiopia, it's a province of Ethiopia. We want a good relation with whole Ethiopia, and we are dealing with the central government, the federal government in Addis Ababa. This had seriously frustrated them. They mobilized every time in their propaganda, and they saying that we are brothers and sisters with Eritreans, and so on and so on. This is their propaganda, which continuing every day, and to confuse the people of Tigray and to confuse also the people of Ethiopia. Of course, in Ethiopia, majority of the population, because of the suffering, the domination, the exploitation, the killing and the jailing and all this what happened and the genocide in Somali region, Wallaga, Benishungul, in Oromo area, even in Amhara area and so on, there was no sympathy for TPLF at all with the majority Ethiopian people. Finally, I think TPLF, after it made its election and so on, they reached the last limit. And their last limit, probably they were reading their situation very wrongly, and they were reading also the international situation and the regional situation, the change in Sudan, the defeat of the Islamists in Sudan, a new transitional government coming in Sudan. All this made them panic, I suppose. And finally, they decided to attack the federal government army, which was stationed in Tigray at the border between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And they killed a lot of them. It's pity that the federal government, and particularly the federal Ministry of Defense, they could have released. They have released some interviews in Amare from these officers and soldiers, what happened to them, how they were killed, how they were chased away, how they were discriminated. They have to walk hundreds of kilometers without shoes, without clothes. Some of them ran away with a small weapon to Eritrea, received very nicely by Eritrean people and so on. It was released, but it's not sufficient enough. It is.
Yeah, but my question, though, Mohamed, at no time during the past 22 years had the National Army behaved in an aggressive manner towards the civilian Tigrayan population. In fact, the relationship was very cordial. The army helped the people. during difficult times when locusts invaded, for example. It was the army that was helping the peasants, sharing from their ration with the, with people with no food. And overall, it was a very positive relationship, I think. Some of them even married from the local women and had families there. So this aggressive behavior, how do you think the population of Tigray?
It has to do with the ideology and the thinking of TPLF. TPLF thought that it is keeping the army at the border there. It's a sort of a buffer zone for them, whereby they can use the human resources of Ethiopia and the people of Tigray, that they can put them there and bleed Eritrea with no war or no peace strategy. That was their thinking in the beginning. Of course, situation and they didn't expect that it will change very quick. And the army became part of Tigray by staying for a very long time. The second important point is that this army also, it is allocated in Tigray, and it brings also an economic benefit for the economy in Tigray. And of course, these human beings, they have communication, interaction with the population before their relation develop, even intermarriage happen, and so on. But what will happen to this army? They have never thought about it. They never believed that they will, because their understanding is that they will rule Ethiopia at least for the coming 50, 60 years. So what will be, what next? They never had that plan. Suddenly, when they were overthrown and chased away from the center, from Addis Ababa, then the army issue gradually came to their head, I think. And the more it is, Dr. Abiy is consolidating the power in Addis Ababa. Despite of the strategy, they have a strategy of chaos. They couldn't succeed. And then abruptly, they have organized their election and so on and so on. And this time is Western ambassadors and so on. They used to travel to Tigray and come back. I don't know what they advised them, why they didn't influence them to tell them that you are one part of the country, you are also one part of the party, you can deal with it and so on. They didn't put pressure on them. They just go listen to their story, they come back and they convey the same story to the federal government. So their civilized confidence-building diplomacy, it was a charade. It didn't work, and that was not their intention. But they didn't expect. They thought that dual power, will continue in Ethiopia for the coming future. And one is that there will be the federal government. The other one, in their assumption, is that TPLF is strong. It can resist. It can stay in Tigray, and so on. Probably some of them advised them to go for election and so on. There was a lot of conferences in the University of Mekelle that it is to push their demand to confederalism, that Tigray needs a confederal state, and so on and so on. There was a lot of debate. There were a lot of foreigners. They were invited, so-called intelligentsia. They used to present papers and so on. So you could see that the imperialist diplomacy was going for an option that it is TPLF will remain. It is strong. There is nobody can challenge it. Therefore, it is TPLF have to go to a higher state, and that it is probably imposed on the government in Addis Ababa to seek for confederalism and so on. While they knew, and there is a lot of evidences, that they were smuggling weapons, they are organizing them through previous intelligence and so on, conflicts, inter-ethnic conflicts and so on. So their reasoning is Ethiopia is so weak and disorganized and balkanized that TPLF finally will win. Maybe this is the way they have understood, and TPLF is their best friend. And they never also put pressure on TPLF at all, that to tell them, look, your time is over, you have to discuss, you have to obey with the law of the country, and so on. You cannot organize an election and this and this. So my understanding, I was not present when they were talking to them, but I think they have pushed them and they touched their back to say, continue in this line.
These Western forces were encouraging the belligerence, the belligerent attitude.
Absolutely. You could see the later propaganda came because of the failure of this policy, because they never expected. Some experts on Africa and the region, they thought when the demise of TPLF within 2 weeks, they say we didn't expect that TPLF will just evaporate.
That it crumbled like a house of cards.
House of cards. And he said that it is what they have told us, that they were very strong, that organized and so on. It was a lie. I mean, somebody who's an expert more than 50 years of the region, who is also writing for the French journal like René Lefort, he himself in his tweet, he wrote it. He said that it is a surprise for him how TPLF in a shortest period could be defeated and disappear from the political scene. Probably a lot of people which they used to work with them and lobbyists, intelligentsia, intellectuals and so on, paid and non-paid, believe that TPLF is strong. So they never calculated in a sense that TPLF, it is just a balloon. It talks too much, but in reality, it doesn't exist. It is weak, and it doesn't have mass base within Tigray, and it could collapse in a very easily, and they committed suicide in a way. So the attack on the army, it is the process of committing suicide. That is the biggest mistake they have did. If you look the army there, about 31,000, 1/3 of them also are Tigrayan speakers and Tigrayans from the army itself. So to attack, as the late secretary said, it is to danger, he says. So we have to eliminate the enemy within, that it is existing with us, or they will be with us, or we have to eliminate them. We have no other option. And by doing like that, it is a very big treason. When any country, if you do as a group and you attack the national army and you kill them like animals in the street, you drag their bodies in front of the population, remove their shoes, and make them walk 100 kilometers around the villages, and the people can speak on their faces and so on. This is a very big treason.
It's high treason, yes.
High treason, which not mentioned on that. So once it have collapsed and the segment of its leadership also were decimated, then the propaganda started. So it is all their wishful thinking disappeared, and now they have to create a new package of propaganda, because their thinking was simple. The region should not have peace. They should not work together. And particularly the relationship between Eritrea and Ethiopia, it has to be kept in limbo. Because the concept is that a regime change for Eritrea was designed very long time earlier, but they couldn't succeed. And they did all the technique to weaken Eritrea. But they couldn't, the regime change was the plan. They couldn't realize the regime change. What happened is that all their friends around, from Sana'a, Addis Ababa, Khartoum, which they called them the Sana'a group in the past, they collapsed one by one while Eritrea become stronger even. And of course, Eritrea is the main enemy. It is not because Eritrea geographically or as a people is enemy, but Eritrea's vision is not liked at all. This will be a very bad example and have to be crushed. That is why they started the regime change against Eritrea, and they will use Ethiopia as a cannon fodder to change, but they didn't succeed. They waged war, they did everything, propaganda, all sanctioned United Nations, and so on and so on. You could see the time when President Obama visited Ethiopia, the situation of Ethiopia was very bad. And the population situation also was very bad. There was a lot of revolts, people are killed, there was in the Somali area, there was a genocide, and so on. but they didn't care that the Obama regime supported and continued. And even he put the logo that is Eritrea is the North Korea of Africa, and so on and so on. So what happened is, after November 4th, they attacked the army, and then finally part of the army have to run, some of them without clothes, and enter into Eritrea, received by Eritrean people and government and so on. And in fact, they have to be rearmed and given clothes. Then the Ethiopian army and other militias, and in 2 weeks' time, the TPLF military capacity was broken, and after a few days, even segment of their most important leaders captured or killed. Then, second chapter happened. This second chapter, I see, it came from a frustration. Their expectation and the reality are two different situations they are. Their expectation that TPLF will remain for a very long time in the region, and TPLF will block this relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea. As long as TPLF is there, it will be very difficult for Dr. Abiy and for Eritrea that they will resume a good economic, social, psychological, and other relationship among these two countries. This is the target, the first target. Of course, the second target, a little bit, is that the greater Horn of Africa will come into peace, and they might even go further and work together in all sectors of their societies. And their reasoning is there is a bomb. We have there a friend called the TPLF. According to them, it have a mass base. Majority of Tigrayan people support it. It is armed to its state. It have money which have stolen from Ethiopia and so on. Therefore, this group will remain for longer time, and this group, there will be obstacle that this new Horn of Africa idea will not enhance, and it will die before it starts. That was their major hope. But the sudden collapse, before the collapse, they had admiration for TPLF, very heroic, who can fight several wars, they wrote. Even some universities published a PhD thesis of former TPLF Central Committee members, and then published it like book and so on. And of course, these people exaggerated themselves and their organization because they were living in the sky, and the reality in Tigray is totally different. Unfortunate that even those intellectuals who came from the universities, particularly from outside, like Alex Dawal and on so, they couldn't analyze the grievances of the people of Tigray, the majority of the people of Tigray. In fact, they were dual power. The population, they were living alone, and the organization, which is by itself living alone and doesn't have any organic relation with its own people. But they are
a kleptocratic clique that lived in high luxury.
Yes.
In fact, in the capital of Tigray, Mekelle, the section of the town where they had their villas, this kleptocratic apparatchiks of the TPLF. You know what it was called?
Apartheid.
By the apartheid, yeah, apartheid districts, literally.
Yes, because
this is the Tigrans themselves calling.
Indeed, but they were not mingling with the masses, and they were not treating and understanding how the masses in Tigray feel. They were always mingling with the elite, and the elite tells them story, it shows them things, and they really believe, because these are very shallow, petty bourgeois intelligentsia from Europe and United States. What makes them in common with TPLF is, and with some element of opposition, so-called opposition Eritreans, is the hatred they have against Eritrea. That makes them common. That's why they couldn't see what is the relationship, the organic relationship between TPLF and Tigrayan people. It blinded them. the hatred is so extreme against Eritrea, and specific against the president of Eritrea in person, which is, they have also put it in their propaganda for a very long time. They themselves believed their own propaganda and contaminated with their own lies and so on. They could not see and differentiate what's happening on the ground, what was the feeling of the people of Tigray toward the TPLF, and so on and so on. And the conclusion is very wrong. So what happened is when the...
Would you say, if I may interrupt here, that most of those that, Western so-called scholars or experts that the TPLF managed to attract, in fact, were sort of third-rate scholars.
Indeed.
If you examine in the 70s or 60s, there were good scholars that were studying Ethiopia. People like Mark Akis or from different ideological perspectives, but at least they were scholars of high caliber, you would say. But the scholars that came after the rise of TPLF to power after 1991, they were sort of second-rate or third-rate, not very deep, not very bright, but they knew which side their bread was buttered, so to speak, and they were happy to oblige and write, laudatory papers or books for the TPLF, for the most part. I'm not saying all, but the majority.
I agree with you. It is. They were not well versed, and the first is that is not the version they could have learned, but individually they are dishonest people and individuals, basically very corrupt, and have no commitment in anything. Their lifestyle, even you could see. So it's not like the previous one who have a commitment of their own and as individual. Ideologically, they might vary, but they are they have the ethical value, and it is very important for them. And they knew what they wrote; it remains in history, and they will be condemned or appreciated by coming historians and by coming young Ethiopian intellectuals. But this, the new one, particularly European and American one, none of Ethiopian intellectual professors in Addis Ababa University, others, had really appreciated them because they see them as a propagandist,
parasites
for the system. So, and the TPLF know how to deal with them. TPLF being a minority, and it is have no justice. It is itself is an agent. Such kind of people, they know how to entertain them. So it is a convenient of a two-bandit mentality.
Become like a symbiotic relationship, huh?
Indeed. So it is they just right for. In fact, they became part of the TPLF propaganda machine, and the blind hatred also TPLF have toward Eritrea, and they could analyze if they were a very good comrades toward them, they could say, "You are neighbors. You're distant to live here. Why do you create such kind of hatred?" And so on. No, on the contrary, what they wanted to weaken and to destroy Eritrea and so on. They with that line. And of course, some marginalized element who can see the very part of the contradictions and so on. Some Eritreans also joined with this club, which is a club of ethnicists, to call it, or the same who doesn't see the contradiction properly, very narrow thinking, individual point of view, and so on, and obsessed probably also what the Western system tells them. This combined, added to it with their influence together in, for example, in The Guardian, the petty bourgeoisie, which is writes in The Guardian, always an anti-Eritrea, pro-TPLF. You see some element there, they write, and very lazy editor-in-chief like New York Times and so on, they just that and they publish it and so on. This is one element. The second element is that the establishment itself. The establishment from an ideological point of view, from US European interest point of view in the African continent, that is a serious debate. That it is Eritrea is a very bad example. These people, they should be stopped. Second, Africa have about 60% of the world resources, a very big continent. Therefore, any kind of national independence idea is very dangerous, particularly for Europeans, because, and like France, that it is extremely interlinked and dependent with an African continent. At one time, the president of France, Jacques Chirac, the late president of France, he made it very clear. He said, we are subsidized by Africa every year 400 billion. The day that money is not coming, France will face a very big challenge. So it is, in fact, their economy, their life, their lifestyle, all the elite, the petty bourgeoisie in these countries is interconnected with the domination of African continent and the looting of African people. So it is a matter of survival. So any Africans in the past, clever Africans, revolutionary Africans, have been eliminated by Western intelligence in tandem with United States and so on. But for Europe, it is absolutely that it is within the petty bourgeois intelligentsia, within the establishment, there is a hate and love relationship with Africa. They love it because to exploit it is good. They hate any change in that continent brings a disaster, and it tilts the balance of forces within the continent. Then the contradiction between the worker and the bourgeoisie will be very, very hard, and the petty bourgeoisie have to decide to which side they will stand. Now it is, let's go together, flower power situation, money is coming from there, exploitation is continuing, and so and so. Accept a little bit human rights, a little bit other things, but then there is a very established subsidized organizations like NGOs. The NGOs by themselves, they want the poverty of Africa, the misery of Africa. Without them, they cannot intervene. They cannot go there. It's a job creation for them. Secondly, they are subsidized by their own state or by so-called European Union, different states together. They don't have love. There are good Europeans who really revolutionary, who wrote about the African people suffering. The Africans have to fight for themselves and so on. They were, but their number is dwindled. And most of them, they died with old age and so on and so on. But now that the sympathy for Africa is Africa have to be led, have to be controlled, and so on. They speak about the misery of Africa, but they don't speak about the wealth. Their educational system.
You could say this attitude came in the West after the end of the Cold War, with the rise of the unipolar world, the triumph of the so-called end of history, that they became more and more aggressive towards Africa, no understanding of Africa's situation, Africa's needs, Africa's desire to become independent, self-reliant. That sympathy that was there in the 70s, maybe a little bit 80s, disappeared.
Yes, because it's not only for Africa, also for the Arabo-Islamic world is the same. They developed
the global South in general, yes.
Global South in general, and you see in Latin America also is the same. The global South was hated. The global South's rise for the petty bourgeoisie in the imperialist countries brings them in a dilemma. That it is the petty bourgeoisie by itself as a class is a very coward, and it is vacillating element. It can join with a revolutionary movement. If they are honest and so on, they can join also with the democratic movement. Or join becoming, to borrow the word of Malcolm X, the house nigger, that it is clap their master's story, promote their master's story, have little bit something from what remains from the table of the bourgeoisie, little bit they throw for them to enjoy and so on. So that tendency, opportunism, the tendency of opportunism, it increased very much. Second, very important here, I wanted to add before I come to our region, why they dislike us, why they dislike now the new development in our region, and why all this tam-tam and all this campaign against Ethiopia, against Eritrea, against all the region. 10, 15 years ago, a new development developed in Latin America. And that is the change in Venezuela, the coming of Chavez, the change in Bolivia with Evo Morales, the change in Ecuador. For the first time again, the change of the former Sandinista Ortega coming in Nicaragua. Then it is Lula coming in Brazil. All this, Argentina, all this together, they combined a relationship. Also, the Cuban role there, you could see that it created difficulties for them. I do remember when Chavez gave a book of Eduardo Galeano, The Open Veins of Latin America, as a gift to American president. The feeling was that Latin America can work together, and so Latin America, it is an oppressed region, and it's not allowed to stand up also with its 2 feet. And they have tried for almost 15 years. And you could see the coup in Bolivia, the killing, which is itself the killing and the sickness of Chavez, the woman in Argentina. Finally, also what happened with Lula and so on, despite of the corruption they mentioned, the removal of the Communist Party, Lula and his group from Brazil. So right-wing rollback had happened, and to a certain extent they have succeeded in these countries. So this frightened United States and Europe that a new idea, a new relationship among the people of the Latinos is developing, that they can manage their economy and so on. Despite, you could see that it is the Latin America or the Americas, the Latin American association like the African Union we have now, it had always been hijacked by United States, and it is led by extreme right-wing Latin American leadership like Pinochet and all this. So gradually also this association...
You're talking about the Organization of American States, the OAS, yeah.
Yes, start to change its character. And we have seen it in their position on Libya. We have seen it in their position on Iraq when the war was waged against Iraq and so on. This curtailed, and this in the American establishment, and of course the establishment in Europe, it frightened them. It frightened them in a sense that it is what's happening now in the Horn of Africa. It is the carbon copy of this kind of relationship. And this is the major motor of this relationship comes from Eritrea, the idea of Eritrea, regional cooperation and this and this and this. So this have to be killed in an embryo level before it grows, before this idea reaches into the mind of the population and so on. So to stop this major strategy, as they did in Latin America, and as they have destroyed other organizations before, in the Horn of Africa, TPLF was the candidate. But their analysis about their candidate was poor, and it collapsed within 2 weeks' time. In normal circumstance, they could have condemned that it is the behavior of TPLF, an organization, a regional organization, to attack and kill several thousand Ethiopian troops, which is stationed at the border. This is a treason and it is high crime. They didn't do that. Nobody published about that. No European journal, no American journal, no the intelligentsia, so-called friends of TPLF, have mentioned this incident, how the war started, who started it. They never mentioned.
Well, briefly, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on November 17 did mention that attack, the TPLF, also TPLF's firing of rocket missiles at Eritrea and 2 towns of Ethiopia. He did condemn that, but that was the exception, you could say.
Because he was part of the establishment of Trump.
That too, yes, correct.
Yes. Because Trump's vision is to that whatever people say about Trump and how people understand Trump. When Trump was elected, we have published a book called On Trump, and I have written a long article on that about what kind of United States will come. Of course, in Europe, the petty bourgeoisie and also the bourgeoisie from day one was against Trump for several reasons. One is that it is his position on NATO, that NATO is 3% paid by United States. We are not mercenaries. If you want peace, dollar, you have to put another dollar on the table. This is not liked by European elite and by European ruling class. Secondly, disengagement. He wanted to disengage. American troops have to be removed from the areas where they are stationed. It's not liked also this, because the Europeans have not the capacity to send a lot of troops everywhere, even though the French, they are in a specific interest area in the French-speaking Africa. So the development, the idea against Trump, it is the hate about him. It's not because of his internal policy, but it is because of his external policy, who is saying that I will disengage, and this is not liked, and so on. That is why they don't mention, they wrote too much book about against him, but it is, they don't mention the reason, and they don't bring it in a very clear understanding that the people can understand. So TPLF in this, for the neoliberal interventionists, it is a vehicle. It's not because they like the people of Tigray. There was always misery. Young people were living in thousands, dying in the seas, they're dying in the Sahara. They don't give a shit about it. But they wanted to use TPLF as a troublemaker and to stop the regional integration gradually. Because of their experience of Latin America, they say, no, we have suffered, 15 years continued in Latin America, and so on. Situation was different. Internationally, they were always in the UN or other part of the international bodies. They are standing together against any aggression of us, and so on. Therefore, we don't want the same situation to develop in the Horn of Africa. And now, after TPLF disappeared, immediately, a new propaganda. Here I could say the propaganda, the technique they are using of the propaganda, they went back to 1990 Kuwait situation. Kuwait have oil, Tigray have no oil. So the 3 elements systematically they are keeping. They don't talk about the army's killing of the Ethiopian army and so on. Nobody mentioned. What they are saying is that Eritrean troops have entered and they have killed a lot of Tigrayans. This is one element, which in the package makes the package beautiful. The second is the raping of the woman, which makes also Eritrean troops there, raping of women. Third, Eritrean troops are looting. This, when you combine, they were not speaking now about Ethiopia, while Tigray is inside Ethiopia. They come to a conclusion that it is Eritrean troops have to leave from Tigray and Ethiopians have to leave from Tigray. The technique...
It's as if Tigray is
an independent
a separate country.
Yes.
a poor separate country that was invaded by its neighbors.
Indeed. The propaganda was initiated in such a way,
This is what your friend and comrade Michel Colon would call inverting the victim and the aggressor.
Indeed.
The aggressor was the TPLF, which started the war on November 3, November 4, by attacking preemptive strike on the Ethiopian army bases in Tigray. They killed, they captured, and they did all kinds of horrible things. They fired rocket missiles at civilian targets in Asmara, Eritrea, in Gondar, in Bahr Dar. These are the aggressors, but in the propaganda technique, the aggressors became the victims now of all kinds of human rights violations, genocide, rape, and what have you. It's a very bizarre situation.
Very bizarre situation. So the technique is the same. When that daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador in Washington, they made a propaganda program with her about
the 1990 Iraq Gulf War, the first Gulf War.
The first Gulf War, that the Iraqi troops have entered to the hospital where there is a premature babies and so on, and they plug the electricity. That have changed the opinion of the people for intervention and to wage war against them. But it is later.
It was outright lie, of course.
Yes, completely it was made in Washington. So now when you see that, the
girl, in fact, who came as a witness was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador in America.
The same technique now they are using. That it is a lady, she was a combatant of the TPLF, wounded in a battle, and then they turn her as a victim, that it is she lost her leg while she is fighting against and so on, and she was raped and so on. While her father is giving another testimony, they don't care about her father. The purpose is that you have to have physically this woman and so on. Secondly, so the same thing is organized, and then
massive propaganda campaign to make the lie in Dr. Goebbels' word by repeating it 100 times, 1,000 times into becoming an accepted truth.
That is what they are doing. But this is not they love the people of Tigray or so. No. So.
Oh no, we know that. Of course, we know that they don't have any.
Once they initiated, you take a young man from Amnesty International. He comes in a refugee camp in Sudan. Probably some of the people who are in the camp, those who have committed crime in Maikadra and Humara, who ran away to Sudan.
Guilty of genocide, yes.
Genocide. Specifically, he goes to them and he makes an interview with them without verifying anything. And then he releases a document, Amnesty International, with a logo of Amnesty International, and so on. This is a pure propaganda, mockery of justice, and so on. And this is the technique they are using. But the main purpose is that, why they do that? It is to put pressure on the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, because they see the weakest link with Ethiopia, that it is the relationship between Eritrea and Ethiopia. We can break it by doing this, as they did in the 90s. Because any relationship Ethiopia and Eritrea, and having a good relationship and continuing and working together will have a boomerang effect in the Horn of Africa, which is correct also that later on Somalia, President Farmajo have joined with this new Horn of Africa concept. Probably Southern Sudan and the others will join and so on. This idea must be killed. And the only way to kill, this is the situation in Tigray. Let us use the situation in Tigray as a propaganda means, and then this propaganda increased to that extent, and finally the states gets involved.
In fact, Ustaz Mohamed, to go back to that time frame where I mentioned Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the Trump administration then had lost the election, or they were contesting it, but essentially lost the election. November 17, Pompeo gives the the press briefing condemning the TPLF's brazen attacks on Asmara. But around that time was also Susan Rice, the former ambassador to the UN, former Secretary of State for African Affairs under Bill Clinton, under Obama, later the National Security Advisor. Now, of course, in the shadow cabinet of President-elect Biden. Around November 2022, if I'm not mistaken, she tweets on Twitter, quoting a woman, East Africa representative of Human Rights Watch, where that Human Rights Watch representative is insinuating that Ethiopian troops are targeting civilians in Tigray and what have you, And the quote by Susan Rice was, in other words, she says, war crimes. This is November 22, last year, almost 3 months ago. So the writing was on the wall at that time that they were preparing to charge the Ethiopian army and by implication the Eritrean army of war crimes and genocide and what have you, to prepare these attack dogs, the so-called human rights NGOs, Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, to prepare this propaganda attack on Eritrea and Ethiopia. This is on record. I'm not making it up. I have, in fact, tweeted about that. But continue. You see, this has been in the works since November, and the charges were being prepared slowly. You first make allegations, then you conduct investigation. You bring Amnesty's report, then just about a few days ago, Human Rights Watch also wrote a report, and then you take it to the UN Security Council. This reminds you of what scenario does this remind you? 2011, Libya?
It is several things they wanted to achieve. One thing, as I have said, that this good neighborhood relation in the whole of Africa should be disturbed. They see it a threat, not an immediate threat. In normal circumstances, if this good neighborhood continues and the people of the Horn of Africa work together in the economy, social, and so on, and improve the life of their population, American firms can come and do business. If you look at from a business situation, you do business with some wealthy areas. You don't make business with poor people. So what they want is that it is the Horn of Africa to remain poor, and it should be the limit of the Horn of Africa is that food aid and so on, which Ethiopia, between 15, 20 million people, that they were always subsidized by USAID and European Union, that they pay their farmers money and they take the rotten grain and dump it over there. If you improve that condition, that it is the food security of the Horn of Africa gets improved because of the wells and all the objective condition is there, they can the human factor and cooperation is not there. Otherwise, the natural resources, the water, everything is there, the human being is there. If you change this situation, then there is no need to be dependent on food aid. On the contrary, you might even export food as much as possible. So the region must remain this level. Any cooperation is among people and among individuals. When you cooperate and you work together, it creates another atmosphere, and you will see the result that your economy will increase, that life will improve, and so on. So in fact, it is in a way an imperialist and racist ideology that the people who are Horn of Africa are designated to be this situation. They should not improve. And for that is the one is always nagging and putting needle in our affair is the concept of Eritrea, which says food security, self-reliance, and this. That must be stopped. And it can only stop the buffer zone for them is Tigray. And we use Tigray. And Tigray became an opportunity for them. Second, they say that we have to abort it while it is in an embryo level. If it is grow up, the mama reaches 9 months, she delivers the child, that will be difficult. If the child start walking, that's another difficult. And if you start getting strong and walk and so on, it will be even difficult. Then it will charge us more and so on. So those elements in the establishment, the neoliberalist establishment, in alliance with European racist imperialist forces, they don't want that it is. They don't want that it is this region to be independent. I was watching a small television program for business people in Antwerp, in Dutch. There was a relationship between one Belgian businessman with one Ethiopian. They knew each other. They knew each other there in Antwerp. The other one came as a refugee and settled and so on. Finally, the Ethiopian, with his relationship with this Belgian guy, they went to Ethiopia, and this man loved Ethiopia, liked Ethiopia, and so on. And then when he came back, he told him, why don't we open Ethiopian restaurant? It is about Ethiopian food in television. And a new Ethiopian restaurant is opened in Antwerp. And they showed and they explained. And then finally, the woman, she asked this Belgian guy who opened the Ethiopian restaurant, but the one who's managing it is an Ethiopian. He says, I have been to Ethiopia one time. It's a beautiful country, he says. And they have a very nice food, he said, yes. I know that it is the reading and understanding about Ethiopia and this country. Ethiopia is always famine, equal is to famine. But it's not true, and so on. He explained, and they have a lot of food and so on. So I really laughed with my son, and my son also laughed. He said, what he's talking about? Ethiopia is a lot of grey land, a lot they have seen around and so on. But it's the idea the media had put in the mind of the population. So a lot of people will say, oh, this poor place, always they are suffering, we have contributed, the elderly people contributed money to the church, and this, and this, and this. This feeling must...
It's a stereotypical image of
image.
Not only Ethiopia, but the entire African continent, for that matter.
Specific that this is in the television I saw. So if you tell them that it is, we have all this, we have the human factor, and so on. If we cooperate, we can change the face of Ethiopia and so on, and the face of Eritrea, the face of Somalia, the face of the region. That is difficult. That is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. You are because the media gets irritated. To give you an example, when Amnesty International published its document from Sudan, a young journalist who had went to Tigray, a Flemish journalist went to Tigray, and he went to Aksum at that moment and didn't see anything, but he just filmed the religious pilgrimage and so on. But now, when Amnesty International published that, they combined the two, his film that he had been in Aksum and Amnesty report together. They just put it together. And they say, look, a lot of people killed, raped, and so on, and this and this. The same like the priest. They say the priest who's living in Boston is not different from the Kuwaiti affair. It is the same sexist propaganda. Now, such kind of a propaganda, it enters into the mind of the people. First of all, the people of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, and so on in diaspora have to be very clever to understand and the propaganda of this element who doesn't want peace in the region. And they don't want that the people of the region, including the people of Tigray, that we can work together, improve the life of our population and our children and so on. So they are not interested in Tigray. Of course, only a fool can follow their their propaganda. Now they have brought it to the Security Council. Of course, they didn't succeed. As you said, next week also they will bring, and then they will also organize others. But the most important is our strength. If we are unified as much as possible, our consciousness is getting high. And it's thanks also in Ethiopia, people are getting aware and so on. And Ethiopians are...
That's very important. I'm glad you brought that up because the day after tomorrow, on Wednesday, March 10, there's going to be a huge rally in Washington, D.C. of Ethiopians, Eritreans, Somalis against this interventionism. As you've mentioned, last week at the UN Security Council, March 4, Thursday, the United States and its European allies tried to introduce a sneaky resolution against Ethiopia for interventionism. But of course, thanks to the strong stand of Russia, China, and India, who were against this interference in the internal sovereign affairs of Ethiopia, that resolution could not pass. As you said, they're going to try on Thursday also. And there are some other guys, they have all kinds of sneaky ways of trying to pass resolutions like that. But I'm sure both Russia and China and India too, I must say, will not stand for these kinds of interventions. I mean, they have learned their lesson previously, the 2011 one in Libya, Syria, and elsewhere. I mean, people, the mood is a growing sentiment against the concept of so-called humanitarian intervention, which is not humanitarian at all. It is war by other means, by under the guise of humanitarianism. It brings disaster, intervention, and chaos in many countries. So, like you said, the consciousness is raising in our region. People are very much aware. People know what is the situation in Tigray, who was the guilty party, that this massacres that they're hyping up on the ground, things are to the contrary. The situation is stabilizing. Humanitarian access is there, but they will continue to try. I mean, we cannot be let our guards down. We have to remain vigilant and struggle against these kinds of insidious interventionism. And in the few remaining minutes, I would like to give you, what are your thoughts going forward? The new Horn of Africa, in particular Ethiopia, how it's going to weather this growing pressure. Election is coming up in May, I think. What kinds of pressures can we expect for to come from the West on Ethiopia in particular, but also the neighboring countries like Sudan and perhaps Kenya?
First of all, as long as our awareness increases, and particularly in Ethiopia, subnationalism decreases. And decreases in the sense with the demise of TPLF, subnationalism, it is meaningless. It died.
Divisive, toxic sectarianism.
Sectarianism, it has disappeared. Ethiopia needs time to mobilize its human resources in tandem with the Horn of Africa and change the life of the population is possible. If this situation develops in 5 years, we see a lot of results. Secondly, 70% of the population is younger than 35. This generation is willing to listen. It have no that old hangover of the past. The old is gone. My generation and after me, they are all gone. The younger generation have to mobilize and raise their consciousness. Unity is a strength. Unity of the Horn of African people is fundamental now. That we can improve our relationship, we can work together, and so on and so on. That must be agitated everywhere. That it is our relationship is our patriotism must be a regional patriotism. That we can create one kind of psychology and show who is the enemy. This enemy who doesn't want us to live together. While as an individual, we can visit each other, we eat, we have the same values, the same culture, the same psychology, but we were not able to develop it into as a group, as all of us, in one line. Second, we have to make awareness of the youth that it is our region is very important region. It's so important is that it is this region must be kept poor. In order to be a stepping stone for all the strategies the imperialist forces have designed against us and against others. This must be brought that it is in a higher stage. In a higher stage that enough is enough. Kappa. We have suffered for the last 8 decades. We don't want to continue on this line. Our diversity in language, in culture, in psychology is our wealth. They are utilizing our diversity in order to keep us in poverty, misery, and so on and so on. That awareness, the Horn of Africa television, other also YouTube, Ethiopian journalists must come into one understanding. This is the target, one. Second, as you told me Wednesday, there will be a demonstration. All Horn of Africa people must participate. Participate and say, enough. This will bring a signal to those who are cooking an old sauce for us. We have eaten it for 80 years. We got sick out of it. We know your trick. We will not accept. Enough is enough. Let us alone. We are not invading anybody. We are not declaring war against anybody. We are just we want, and this is what we have to explain to ordinary Europeans and Americans. We are not against you. We wanted to trade with you. We wanted to work with you. But your systems, they don't allow us, and they want us always to be in this position. I'm sure honest and decent workers, men and women, in Europe and United States and everywhere in the world will come into our appreciation, and we have to speak as loud as possible. So the United Front of Horn of African people must be created, and this demonstration will be the embryo, the first that will bring unity among the people, including the people of Tigray. That this criminal element, we have to remove them from the people of Tigray, marginalize them, and bring the people of Tigray, they are part of us, they are our brothers and sisters, to come into the front line of building a new Horn of Africa. For everybody who is an activist at this moment, who is struggling, for whatever reason, have to think the upper echelon of our region is very important. The region must have peace. We have to work together. And their aim is to destroy that. And this we have to explain. It's not, they are not interested about human rights. These are the people at one time, after they make our families poor, they used to buy our children in the name of adoption with $50,000, $40,000. All those adopted kids in the United States and Europe, some of them are suffering, committed suicide, and so on. They want us, in fact, a miserable, like a very big Auschwitz concentration camp. We live, but when they choose, they can come adopt our children, they can take our resources. When they wanted to eat our food, they can come to our restaurants and they visit us. We have a very nice weather, they can come also little bit enjoy, but then they don't see us as human beings. They don't want what they want for their children to happen to us. So in this ugly war, we have to be very careful. We have to defend ourselves, and we have to think for ourselves. We should not give interest toward them, but mobilize, organize should be our motto. Organize in a sense that all of us were brothers and sisters, and this subnational element who try to come in between, we should tell them this is a primitive ideology. It have no meaning anymore. The people of Horn of Africa is one, and it is we are thanks to speak several languages. We are one people. We are from this region. Nobody create us in incubation and so on and so on, and mobilize as much as possible and support the people of Ethiopia, the people of Eritrea, the people of Somalia, and so on. Of course, Kenya, he himself is minus, but the population in Kenya, I visited several times Kenya and so on, the population in Kenya is easy to communicate and to explain. To a certain extent, their understanding of the world a little bit better, and we can explain that it is that Kenya is part of us. When I go to Kenya, I have never felt any hostility from the Kenyan people. We can bring them, and we have to make our debate. Our radios, our YouTube programmers, our televisions, they should inculcate this idea, and if we unify, the maximum we get unified, then we will succeed. Our Sudanese brother, I am really appealing to them. That is, the new Horn of Africa, it's also a solution to them, to Sudan by itself. Please think in a higher stage. Stop thinking in Khartoum Triangle vision, which have destroyed the country. The same to our brothers in Southern Sudan. We are all destined to live there. Nobody can change that reality. That is a fact. The only thing that because we live there, we have to make our region peaceful, one, second, cooperative, and then work together hand to hand, and to see the result in a very short period.
Well, those are indeed wise words for the new Horn of Africa, or vision for the new Horn of Africa. It is facing challenge, of course, and hostilities from the usual suspects, but the people are determined. The people are mobilizing and organizing for peace, for sovereignty, for dignity. And by way of conclusion, Mohamed, I would like to quote from our good friend, the president of the Somali region, the dynamic visionary leader, President Mustafa Umar, in his Facebook post from 6 days ago, where he said, as for the so-called international partners, when will they talk about the Gunagado massacre, the Korille massacre, the Malagaka massacre, the Gahamdo massacre, the Moyaha massacre, and the many other killings committed by TPLF against the Somali people? Attempts to resurrect the devilish TPLF in the name of human rights and humanitarianism will not bring peace to the Horn of Africa. Nor are we afraid of confronting imperialism, which subordinates human rights to its strategic interests. Very powerful words which echo our sentiment here in the Horn of Africa TV and our vision for the new Horn of Africa. Thank you very much. We have had a good discussion explaining the current situation and the challenge facing our region and the struggles there. Next week, inshallah, we will continue our discussion as a follow-up to this. And we are gearing up, of course, for a conference on New Horn of Africa we are organizing for March 13. We wish all the Ethiopians, Eritreans, and Somalis in the eastern coast of the United States, the Washington, D.C. area, a very successful demonstration, manifestation of solidarity this Wednesday, March 10. And as always, we will continue to advocate fearlessly for peace, cooperation in the New Horn of Africa. Until next time, I am Elias Amare. Salam.